It's it's really hard to even know what to say at this point to a very large extent. This has clearly been one of the most difficult few days that I can remember since the war began, and that's saying a lot. The ups and downs, um, the sadness of Thursday, only catapulted by the events that we discovered on Friday morning, making it so much worse. And then, of course, a little bit on Friday night, learning that the body had been returned. And then, of course, the good news when we got back six hostages. But even that had this certain more bittersweet feeling than the other releases. I'm not even totally sure why. Maybe it was the weather. It was dark and cold and everything else. Maybe that was part of it. Part of it is we were also numb from the events of the day before. And the events of the day before took a wound that we have, which is October 7th. Not that it was healing, but there was beginning to be a scab forming to some extent. It was falling a little bit back in time. I mean, we always keep on hearing stories and everything else, but the events of the Bibas family brought it so much more to light, so much more immediate, so much real. And like I wrote last night, I think there's a an interesting similarity um, in terms of the Holocaust between the story of Anne Frank and the Bibases. The Holocaust, when it was numbers. Terrible thing happened. Millions died. It sort of had lost its sort of scope and meaning to some extent. But then the story of Anne Frank managed to uh, punctuate through those numbers and tell the story of one individual little girl that touched millions and millions all over the world. Same with the Bibases. There were a lot of other kids killed on October 7th. I don't know their names, to be honest with you. I don't even know the exact number of them that were killed in terms of children. But lots of children were killed on October 7th with their parents, before their parents, their grandparents, you name it, all sorts of terrible situations. But by and large, they're at this point nameless, even though on the Israeli television, over the certainly the first 6 months of the war, we kept on hearing stories of each one of them. But one sort of faded into the other. You sort of get numb. You don't turn off the TV, but you try. I can't even put it, can't even explain it. It's like there's a limit to how many terrible stories you can hear. And to some extent, I've mentioned that before, it's part of the reason why Israelis can't listen to the stories of the suffering in Gaza, or most Israelis can't listen to the stories in Gaza because they're overwhelmed with the stories that we lived through, or friends lived through, or relatives lived through, or our neighbors, or people we just knew secondhand, etc. And it was an overwhelming number, but there was no real face to it. And the Bibas kids were that face, certainly in Israel, but all over the world, as far as I can tell. And the concept that they were strangled and then their heads beaten in is like so horrific a thought. And of course, once again, it brings back those images that we've all seen from the Holocaust of kids grabbed from their mother's arms and shot and all the other things. I don't need to go into it. And I'm not someone who says that October 7th was comparable in any which way to the Holocaust, because it wasn't. However, the day itself was traumatic like any terrible day during the Holocaust. And of course, most and much more traumatic because it happened in the Jewish state that we said was the whole point of the Jewish state was to protect against these sort of things. Now, we understood after October 7th that they really, really hate us. Who they are, that's an issue to be discussed and to be argued. And is it 60%? Is it 30%? Is it 90%? Which percentage of Gazans? I don't know. I truly don't know. I'm not sure that it really matters at this point. But enough of them really, really, truly hate us. Are they historically right in hating us? No. History is on our side in terms of most, not all, but most of the decisions that we made over most of the history of the state of Israel were the moral decisions, were the decisions um, to compromise. We made all the right decisions, like I said, with some exceptions, no doubt. But by and large, we made the right moral decisions throughout our history. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter whether, it does not matter to a 17-year-old in Gaza whose brother was killed by our soldiers, whose grandfather might have been shot, etc. I can go through all the different scenarios. He's going to hate us. He's going to hate us because he was taught to hate us in school, and he's going to hate us because of what went on during the war, and he's going to hate us because he feels like he can't go anywhere to do anything. Some can, but by and large they can't. And they blame us for all of these things, even if it's not really our fault, or it's only partly our fault, but we're the ones to blame. So if I'm a 17-year-old in Gaza, I'm going to hate all the Israelis and ultimately all the Jews, because to them, Jews and Israelis are synonymous. And Jews may not want to admit it, but for better or for worse, if you're a Jew, you're equated to be an Israeli, at least amongst those sorts of people, and they hate us. There's no question about it. The problem is, what do you do with that information? And I don't have the answer. I was talking early this afternoon to a friend. He defines himself as center left. He's semi-involved in politics, not a politician, but adjacent, let's put it that way. And he said to me, I sort of had heard the story, but I hadn't paid attention. One of the survivors of Be'eri said, thank God this didn't happen in one of the settlements in the West Bank. I said, okay, why? Because if it happened in one of the settlements in the West Bank, we being the Israeli left, would have said, Magia lahem. They deserve it for being in the middle of these areas, etc. What are they doing settling in the middle of the West Bank? You know, that's what happens when you go to the wrong places, so to speak. And of course, people who got killed were peace activists, people who are living, on the inside the Green Line, inside of Israel, who more than anything else, so many of them worked or tried to work for peace with Gaza all these years. And yet they were the ones who were killed, who were burned, who were kidnapped, etc. So what does that mean? How are we supposed to react at this point? I'm talking now about I'll define myself as center left. I'm not far left, but I'm center left or have been center left. I don't even know what that means anymore. I truly don't know what that means anymore. And so where does that take us from here? How are we supposed to react from here going forward? How are we supposed to listen to the voices that say, just give them a chance, you can get a two-state solution, they'll live in peace with you. You know, I don't think anyone on the left, except for some really crazy dreamers, was 100% sure that if we followed the Oslo Accords to its very end, we would live in peace and prosperity forever. I think most people, even those on the left, and certainly people like Shimon Peres and other such people, um, believe that let's give it a chance. And that's probably was my view too. We need to give it a chance. We need to be able to take a risk for peace, because without a risk for peace, what is the future? Are we going to live in constant battle with these people forever? Maybe the answer is yes. Maybe the answer is, we will live on the sword for the rest of our lives. And I'm going to talk about my life, which, best case, if miracles occur, is 30 years. But is it going to be that way for my children's life, my grandchildren's life? How long is that going to be? How do we end up with some sort of a peace with people who hate us, hate our existence, and have reason to hate us? That's the problem with all of it. It's not like the hate is not based on anything. It's not like, we can just teach them not to hate us. We need to re-educate them like they did in the United Arab Emirates. Well, yes, in the United Arab Emirates, the students in the United Arab Emirates had no personal reason to hate us. Let's be realistic. They had no reason to hate us whatsoever. They were taught to hate us. They were taught that Jews are not as don't have the same rights maybe as Muslims. They're tried all sorts of things, but it was, it was abstract. It wasn't any sort of personal hatred. None of them had any personal experience with us, any reason to hate us. So, you know what? They're able to institute new education in Saudi Arabia to a lesser extent, but the United Arab Emirates and the other Gulf states. And guess what? Everything based on, anti-Semitism has gone way down. Same thing, look at Nazi Germany, right? The claim is made, well, we just have to do what was done in Nazi Germany, a denazification program that was done in Nazi Germany. It's a great plan. mostly worked, although I don't know about the results of today's election with the AFD, but we'll leave that part aside for the moment. But um, it worked for 70 years. And but there's a real reason that, one of the things about the Nazis is they also individually, in very few cases, had any real reason to hate us. I mean, there were always the odd case, person who felt he was cheated by a Jew or who knows what. But by and large, it was a political hatred. It was a hatred that was taught. It wasn't a hatred that they had experienced. And and don't get me wrong here. I'm not trying to speak as someone on the left who thinks, oh, if we only do this and that. But I think we need to recognize the fact that these people truly hate us. And there's very little we can do, certainly in the short range, that's going to decrease their hatred. Maybe we can do things, maybe we can talk about things, but nothing's going to have an effect in any short period of time. And of course, if we don't make any plans long term, then it's not going to get any better. And of course, we've never made any long term plans. We don't make long term plans in this country. We never, 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 never had a serious strategic discussion in this country, other than the people who were sort of wanting to go for a two-state. But alternatively, what do we want to do with the West Bank? How is this possibly going to work? You listen to the Israeli right, we're going to annex it. Well, what does that mean? And what good does that do? Annexing it, so maybe they'll get some better social services, I'm not sure. But what does that do in terms of all the people who live there? And what, we're just going to deny them all the vote forever and that's going to work? So one of the things that, of course, is the most disturbing and of everything is the fact that I don't have a solution. Now one of the problems, of course, and this is an American problem also, is Americans always think there's a solution to every problem. It's a very American view. There's always a solution to a problem. Well, I'm going to put into ChatGPT, and what's the solution to the problem? They'll have some sort of idea, but it's not likely to work. And if I put it into all three LLMs I use, it'll get me three different answers. And I don't know. I don't see one. I don't see where we get one. And so it's really, really very challenging. So the question is, where do we go from here? And right now, we have some immediate problems. The immediate problem we have is we've gotten the last of the hostages as part of the first part of the deal. For reasons that are not totally clear, the government under Netanyahu has decided not to release the prisoners who were supposed to be released last night and to violate the agreement under some cooked up excuse that they were violating the agreement by having those ceremonies that were so disgusting. The ceremonies were disgusting. There's no question the ceremonies were disgusting. However, there's no part in the agreement that said anything about ceremonies. Nothing said about that. We had an agreement. We signed an agreement. Now, we can say we're in the Middle East. Who has to follow agreements? We can just ignore agreements. But that is short-sighted, at least as far as I'm concerned. I would like us to sign an agreement and eventually find an excuse to abrogate that agreement. But that's on the big side. I wrote a few weeks ago, or a few days ago even, I don't remember anymore, that we need to go to the second stage. We need to agree to pull out of Gaza. We need to agree to the end of the war. And then we wait. We wait until the first time that they violate the agreement, the first rocket that gets fired at us, the first, whatever it'll be, we can guarantee the fact that some group within Gaza is going to do something to violate the agreement. And when they do, we have the army all ready. We executed a surprise attack and take back and do what we need to eliminate Hamas. But first, we need to get back our hostages. There's no logic in not doing that. There's no logic other than the political logic, especially for better or for worse with Trump in the White House. They're not going to stop us from going back later on. So it's just, the far right who doesn't want an agreement, who doesn't want any sort of concessions. And of course, a lot of them are against releasing any of these prisoners. It's disgusting having to release them, but we knew we'd have to release them. Let's be honest. We have a history of releasing these prisoners over the years. And that was the price of the failure of October 11th. October 7th. So, that's the reality. And if we have to pay for that reality, we need to pay for that reality. So that's what we should be doing. But Netanyahu is really afraid of his coalition. It's not clear he's going to pass the budget, even with the ultra-Orthodox right now. He's trying to pull off saying that he'll pass the draft law after they pass the budget. And I don't think, they might buy the Brooklyn Bridge once, but I don't think they're ready to buy the Brooklyn Bridge a second time. So I'm not sure they're going to go along with that. But as far as he's concerned, the single most important thing for the future of the Jewish people is that he remains Prime Minister of Israel. Nothing else counts other than that. He will save the Jewish people single-handedly without any help from anybody else. And as long as he stays Prime Minister, we're safe. That's what he thinks, I'm afraid. At any rate, so we're at the stage where we have 22 hostages plus 2 foreign workers, we think. So that's 24 living hostages left in Gaza. We need to get them out. We left them to be taken on October 7th. And nothing we do now and nothing we agree to now means we can't do something later on. And about 80% of the Israeli public favors that. But why should the public be of any importance here? What's more important is a coalition. It's the same way that 80% of the Israeli public favors a National Commission of Inquiry into what happened on October 7th. And Netanyahu has been successfully avoiding that consistently. So both those things, public opinion really doesn't matter to him at this point, because public opinion is not as important as passing his budget and staying in power, which is the single most important thing. It always has been. It's been his deterministic thing from the beginning of his time as prime minister, and it continues to be what he considers to be the single most important thing. Now, let's just turn our direction to two other places. First of all, Lebanon. Today was Nasrallah's funeral. We can say two things. Boy, have things changed. The funeral took place today. They're saying hundreds of thousands. I don't think that number is correct from what I could see from aerial views. It was tens of thousands, but okay, I'm not going to count the number of people at a funeral. However, Israeli fighter jets buzzed the funeral, and no one could do anything about it. It was a very clear statement. Who's in control of the air over Lebanon? Who's in control? Hezbollah you can't do anything. There's nothing you can do. And even if you wanted to, it's impossible for you to do anything at this point. We bombed a number of Hezbollah locations in northern Lebanon, places that we said were violating the agreement. And we were also turning over a lot of small things for the United States and the Lebanese government to do. Another really, really important statement was made today by the Lebanese president. He said that the Lebanese people have suffered enough for other people's wars. We suffered enough for the Palestinians. We're not interested in suffering anymore for the Palestinians. In other words, count us out. We have no interest in getting involved in anything relating to the Palestinians anymore. No Lebanese president could have said that until now, because he would have been killed by Hezbollah. At this point, Hezbollah has been weakened enough so that he can get away with it, it looks like. And we can dream that Lebanon may have changed enough that its whole focus could change. And maybe there's no reason why at some point we can't reach a peace agreement with the Lebanese. That was the dream back in the 1980s. I remember prior to our peace with Egypt, whenever I would be up north and near the Lebanese border, everyone would say, there's the second country that we will sign a peace agreement with. Because they couldn't be first because they were afraid to be first. But as soon as someone else signs a peace agreement, they will sign it. Well, by the time we signed an agreement with Egypt, the Palestinians, the PLO, was embedded deep into Lebanon. And when they got kicked out in 1980, the Hezbollah came into being. And so there was never a chance for that to happen. We attempted to sign an agreement. Sharon did. And the person he was trying to sign an agreement with was assassinated by the Syrians. But maybe we're back into a new timeline, and maybe that timeline could work out well. And maybe it could. It's a point of light, a point of optimism. Additionally, the bus bombings, or attempted buses were bombed. So the bus bombings on Thursday night Of course, that takes us back into a darker period of time. Uh, the time of basically the Second Intifada when buses were blowing up. This was both a very successful and a very amateurish attempt simultaneously. We don't know a lot of the details. From what I understand, it's on very, very strong censorship. What we've done, who's been arrested, and et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to even speculate because, like I said, it's highly censored, and I don't have the data. And anything I would speculate would be, such basic speculation. Um, but of course, going back and having a situation where we once again have to worry about getting on buses or riding next to buses and all those sort of things, the things from the Second Intifada, is of course very, very frightening. And we can hope we're not back there. Look, there's been warnings about this uh, since the beginning of the war. Security establishment has warned that we should not, we would cut off all workers from the West Bank from coming into Israel. At the same time, we cut back some of the funding for the Palestinian Authority. So what that meant was the Palestinian Authority couldn't pay full salaries, and 100,000 workers would come in every day or every week, who were each one of them were earning for 5, 6 people. They don't have jobs right now inside of Israel, except the ones that are coming in illegally. And basically, that was the pressure amongst the Israeli right not to let them in. Everyone is a terrorist. Maybe they are, I don't know. But the fact is that they've all worked here for decades. And there have been 1 or 2 cases over those decades of terrorism. In the meantime, they don't have jobs, and our building sites are moving along at 1/3 speed because they're not here to do the jobs that they do. We have not successfully imported foreign workers to do these jobs more in most cases, and the Israelis are not interested. There is a severe shortage of workers in Israel at the moment. Even in areas like high tech, there aren't enough high tech people right now in Israel. There's across the board in many areas, there's a real shortage, created both by the number of people in reserve duty over a period of time, an economy that is somehow growing despite everything, and not enough people in the key areas. And again, our population is growing, but our population is growing in the wrong places. Population is growing every year, but it's mostly ultra Orthodox who are being added to the workforce, and they don't, or the theoretical workforce, and they by and large don't work. So it's a real challenge going forward economically, and that's for a whole separate discussion we could have about economics. But in the meantime, Israeli tanks have gone into the West Bank for the first time since Shomot Chomot, which was a few years ago, to say the least. And to the end of the Second Intifada. It doesn't really mean a lot. It just means 2 things. First of all, that the Israeli tanks they're less worried about of tanks being targets than they were. The Gaza war has proven that our tanks are pretty impervious to being attacked by rockets and other means, and therefore they make not, if they're manned, reasonably good stationary forts, so to speak. And second of all, is sign of strength. Tanks, I don't know, I'm not sure how much strength it really shows, but it does show some. So more troops in the West Bank. Will we wipe out terror? Of course not. That's one of the problems, is that anyone who promises we'll wipe out terror to the last terrorists. We've been fighting terrorism since, you pick the date, 1920, when the first riots in Jaffa, 1929 with Hebron, the riots, the Arab riots in 1936. You pick the date. You can pick any date in our history, and we've been fighting terror since that date. We won't succeed in eliminating it. We'll succeed in limiting it as much as we can. That's what it amounts to. That's all you can really do ultimately. It's like wiping out crime. Anyone think you're going to wipe out crime in New York by adding another 10,000 police? Will that wipe it out? Maybe it'll help, but might bankrupt New York while doing it. So therein lies always a challenge with these things. So that's more or less where we stand at this point. I wish someone said to me before we got on the call that I should smile, because if I smile, it means good things. I'm smiling, I'm happy, etc., etc. And I'll be happy to smile in Disney with my grandkids in 3 weeks. I'll smile there, I promise. I'll send pictures. Uh, I'll smile then. But it's hard to smile in terms of, on a personal level, one can smile about the good things that happen in life and one can be sad. But on a national level, I don't know anyone who's smiling. I really don't. And I talk to a fairly large number of people, and I just don't. It doesn't matter which side you're on. You listen to the stories. We hear the stories of the hostages when they come back, and you imagine yourself or your children in those circumstances. And how do you smile? What are you supposed to smile about? And it's really, really difficult. Now, yes, we have to find a way of smiling. They keep on saying that the surveys keep on showing we're the third happiest country in the world or the second happiest country in the world. And I don't know, we see these surveys. Um, I'm not sure what to make of them, to be quite honest. I don't know. Part of it has to do with something else. It's hard to, when they say happiness may not be the issue of smiling or that sort of thing. Happiness may be some sort of satisfaction that your life has meaning. And that part I agree with, other than, being concerned about the future of this country. Um, I came here first when I first moved here and still here all these years back and forth, but here now for many, many years now, is that I still believe that Jewish history, for better or for worse, is being made here. And that, even if my contribution is 0.00001%, at least I pay taxes, like government gets some of my money, and whatever else, that it's part of Jewish history. It's making a difference. And that this is the center stage of Jewish history. And I think many Israelis feel the same way, even without being able to identify it in the same way. There's also one big, big difference. And, I cannot compare. If I walk down the streets of Tel Aviv in any of these days, good, bad, and different days, I can have a conversation with anybody I run into, and we'll share relatively the same emotions, the same concerns. We might have different views politically, but we'll be more or less in the same place emotionally and the same caring emotionally. And the fact that we care for each other, even though we don't know each other, that's very real. And I think that provides some sense of happiness, however you define that, contentment, shall we say. But will it be enough? I don't know. Going forward, I just don't know. When we all realize that there is no hope for peace in our children's generation, if we come to that conclusion, I don't know where we'll be psychologically. I truly don't know. But I'll remain optimistic. I'll smile for person. See, it's a smiley day. But I just don't know. Okay, we're past the halfway mark, so I'll go to questions. I'll do my best to find you. My wife will yell at me if I don't. Michael.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah. The hostage, I think he was called Elia Cohen, kissed not one but two Hamas foreheads. What do you make of that, and what are people making of it?
He was told to do it. That's what he said. He was told to do it. When you're in that situation, you don't realize that you're about to be free in 2 seconds and that there's no cost to not following orders. Just
But
think about
nobody else seems to have been told to do it.
Well, they decided he would do it. I don't know. Listen, he's also supposedly the friendliest of all the hostages. Just his his uh his uh his personality. I'm being told that it was Ofer Shem Tov who did that. What? Omer.
Right.
Omer
Yeah.
Shem Tov. But okay.
Right.
But again, there's no point in trying to analyze something like that. If you're in a very situation that you can't really expect
Yeah.
to really
Okay.
do that. Okay, AirPad, Richard.
I have a question. I understand that Trump has participated in getting the hostages home a little bit sooner than they may have otherwise. But I'm amazed that there's a lack of trust from the Israeli people in this man. And my feeling is he would turn on Israel on a dime if it was for Saudi money or for esteem in the world. And please tell me that some Israelis feel that way as well, or correct me that I'm wrong.
Okay, so some Israelis understand that. Look, Israelis are emotional people. He loves us, we love him. You know, he shows his love, and he does show his love. Let's be sorry. Even though Biden clearly loved us too, but as Biden wasn't as emotive as Trump. Whether you like Trump or not like Trump, you got to admit the fact that he's a good communicator. So he's was a better communicator than Biden, for better or for worse. So he loves us, so we love him, quote unquote. Israelis are, look, it's covered here what he's doing to Ukraine. There's no question. It's not getting the top of the news. As far as I'm concerned, it's the most important news story in the world right now, much more important than what's going on here. But it is being covered to a lesser extent. Some Israelis are understanding the fact that he could stab us in the back and in the front and everything else simultaneously if it serves his interest, possibly. Now, look, I am the absolute last person who's going to generally defend Trump. I've opposed him since 2016, and I opposed him this time particularly just because of Ukraine. I said I'd support any Republican who I knew would support Ukraine. He was not one of them. He's doing exactly what he said, and all these stupid Republican senators who are surprised all of a sudden are a bunch of idiots, or they're just afraid. But leave that part aside. However, what I have to say in his defense is I don't think he knows a lot about many things in foreign affairs. Maybe a lot of them, but he's told by Putin. I don't know. That's a separate story. But I think he does know a little bit about us. And I said all along when he had his what was it, the Tochnit HaMeah, his big plan in the last in his last presidency. I said to I had been in touch with some Palestinian members of the Palestinian Authority because we appeared together on a couple of television shows, and I said to them, "Listen, accept it. Don't reject it. Accept it, and then negotiate it. Accept it. Don't say no to this guy. Say yes to this guy. He really wanted to bring peace. He thought he could bring peace. Whether he could bring peace, that's a different story. But he actually, I think, has some positive feelings towards us. Again, I wouldn't bet my country on it, and I don't trust him very much, but I do think he has positive feelings towards us. So, I understand the Israelis, and the Israelis are desperate for love. Israelis are desperate for love after this year, and so he gives love a little bit. So I think people are concerned, understand that. The Ukrainian issue is, of course, pretty hard for the average Israeli to understand at all. It's more understandable in America because I believe the American rights news media has been so infiltrated by the Russians over the last 8, 9 years that they've been filled with false propaganda about Ukraine repeatedly over the last 8 years. I've seen it from talking to some people. Some of you have seen I go on this radio show every Monday, and I see it sometimes from the questions that this man who used to be normal but became a Trumpist 8, 10 years ago, the questions he asks me, and I'm asking, where did you hear such ridiculous nonsense, basically? And that's because the press, the media that these people are consuming, Epic News and all these crazy sites, they're Russian propaganda sites, and they've been taught that Zelensky is a crook, and they've been taught that the Europeans haven't been giving money, and only America, you name it, all the things that Trump lies about that everyone believes. Israelis have not been subject to that propaganda. So I don't know. We don't have any choices really. Whose hat should we put our hopes into? It's only him at the moment. There's no other choice. There's no one else. So we can hope for the best, and nothing else I could say really. Because okay. Next. Lisa, you're in the chat, but how about doing it on live? Lisa Ada? Okay, I'll read the chat.
I'm here. Okay.
Okay, got it.
I was in another room with the speaker. just wondering what the Arab countries will come up in response to Trump's challenge, and will it be something acceptable to Israel? And then secondly, how with it just seems so hypocritical for the ultra Orthodox to say, go fight in Gaza, and they don't want to, join the military.
Okay,
That
so
might be no.
okay, so the two points. First of all, there's an Egyptian plan. The Egyptian plan is how to rebuild Gaza, right? That has to do with some technical, move people here, move people there, we'll build here, we'll build there. It's a technical plan on physically rebuilding Gaza. The problem with the plan is it does not include a political element to it, at least now. Who's going to be in control of Gaza while this is taking place? Who's going to be in control of Gaza after the fact? Now, I don't think we're going to I don't think we should go back to war right now to ensure that we take Hamas out of power right now. We should do that later. But on the other hand, we certainly shouldn't allow Gaza to be rebuilt with Hamas in power. And so therein lies the difficulty. If Hamas wants to stay in power, that's their prerogative. They can stay in power over the ruins of what's left of Gaza, and they can figure out how they're going to govern a country that's in 70% ruins. If someone wants to come and rebuild it, we only allow rebuilding if someone else is in charge, really in charge. What we don't want more than anything else is a situation in Gaza like Hezbollah in Lebanon, where there's one government and then there's Hezbollah, in this case Hamas, which is the real power. They're the ones with the weapons, and they actually control things, even though the government is something else. So can we get that? I don't know. It really a question of how hard we can push Hamas, or can they be pushed? Who's in control of Hamas at this point? There are questions we don't quite understand. Look, I hope that our intelligence is much better today on Hamas than it was prior to October 7th. I assume it is, but I don't know it. And I haven't heard any of the commentators with any tremendous insight into the politics of Gaza right now, other than the fact that Hamas is in charge more than anything else, and a sense of defeat, the fact that Hamas is in charge. As to your other question, the ultra-Orthodox do not want us to go back to war. They understand exactly what you just said. Their chance of getting an exemption, which is not really very big right now to begin with, decreases tremendously if more Israeli troops end up being killed. In other words, the only chance of them getting some sort of exemption out of a government here can only happen after months and months when our soldiers aren't getting killed. As minute that our soldiers are getting killed, the question comes back to, why is our blood more valuable than your blood, et cetera, et cetera. So they don't want us to go back to war, but they don't control the government. Look, Israel is a parliamentary democracy run like a kingdom. The stories of King Bibi is very true. Whether we like it or not, there is a single man making almost all the decisions in this country. No one is really willing to go against him. His coalition partners are not all that strong. They might break with him over this issue of draft exemption, but only because their rabbis are going to insist on it. If we start, we're starting to see the first of the ultra-Orthodox kids being turned away from the airport, not being allowed to go overseas. The money is as of March 1st, the money for the daycare centers is going to run out. There'll start being things that are going to start really hurting them if they don't get drafted. So I don't, that's the only place I see where he has some vulnerability. But even there, I just don't know.
Did you see also in New York that the Department of Education is closing down 2 yeshivas in Williamsburg not teaching English and not teaching history and all this other math?
Taken long enough. Let me put it that way. It really has taken long enough. I don't, in America, you really have very clear laws of minimum educational standards that exist. Israel doesn't really in the same way. And they obviously, look, the ultra-Orthodox in America also learn how to know about block voting. So they have more political power than they would normally have by their numbers, because when the rabbi says vote for somebody, they all vote for whoever it may be. But we don't want the same situation to be even more so in America than it is in Israel, where we have a generation who can't get a job because they don't know anything. So, but of course, there'll be a
I've
lot of
got a
jobs
question.
available from illegal aliens that have been pushed out. So who knows? Go ahead, Rod.
I've got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've wondered this for since October 7th. Shortly after that, I read that there had been the government picked up guns from the kibbutz, several of them, because, and the explanation was that they kept losing them, and so and I'm American. I was in the Army for 4 years, reserved for a lot of years, law enforcement. That doesn't compute to me. I mean, you don't. I presume these are government guns, and I presume that they have a selector switch for automatic fire. You don't lose those. Don't. Yeah, that's not a
Okay, so
category. That's not a thing.
let's put a little bit of order into the whole thing. So when I was in the Army way back when, that was in the mid 70s, mid to late 70s, every soldier when he went home for leave took his gun with him. Didn't matter what his position was, what was going on. You took your gun home with you when you went home. Some point in the, I'm going to say the 90s. I'm not really sure. It could have been in the 2000s. But what was happening, well, let me put it this way. In 2000, during the second Intifada, we gave out lots of gun permits for guards and everything else. And then what happened was the number of homicides grew radically. Accidental deaths, mostly family deaths. You know, most murders, etc., are usually family situations. What would normally be screaming and yelling and throwing something at someone ended up being someone pulling out a gun and firing. You know, that now we can argue that whole question, but it's the same question in America, right? In other words, guns don't kill, but guns make it easier to kill. That's the reality. You know, if I get really angry at you and I don't have a gun, well, yeah, well, I can't use a knife. You're a bigger guy than me. You know, it's not going to work that well. But if I have a gun, I can just shoot you before my anger dissipates a little bit. And I realized so that was the decision. So at that point, they cut back in the number of Israelis who were given guns, and the number of soldiers. There were also situations of soldiers committing suicide, and they were committing suicide with their guns. Now, I'm sure the same thing happens in the American army as well. It happens in every army. Wherever there's guns, people commit suicide. Wherever there are a lot of guns, the suicide rate is higher. That's just the reality. Whether it's, you know, it's a different argument. So they cut back the number of guns that people could have. The other thing that was taking place was guns were being stolen. In other words, there were gun thieves who were going and breaking in and stealing the guns and then selling them there's been a rise in crime in Israel over the years, and a lot of the weapons that are being used by these criminals were guns stolen from the army. And you know, you can make all the arguments about the guns being safe and everything else, but generally speaking, especially on the kibbutzim, they were locked up, but they weren't necessarily locked up in the best possible ways. So the bottom line was some guns were taken away, but more importantly, and this is where the problem lies, the guns were still on the kibbutzim, but they were put in a central armory. In other words, every kibbutz had an armory, and the rapid defense group knew exactly where to go to get their guns. No kibbutz is that big. The furthest the armory was away was, you know, half a mile. That's the other end of the kibbutz, basically. But generally, it was within a 5 or 10 minute walk run to the armory to get the guns. People didn't want guns floating around the houses, and since they're long guns, it's not like, you know, a pistol. And people had pistols in their homes, but the M16s or the more advanced assault rifles you can't really put in your drawer. So they were held in the armory. The problem that occurred was it took time to get to the armory. On October 7th, people were surprised, and some people couldn't get to the armory. Sometimes the Nukhba forces got to the armory before they did. And so those were some of the problems that existed. Again, everything is in retrospect quite clear it shouldn't have happened, but there's so many different points of failure that occurred on that day that was one of the points of failure. But there were many before that, let's put it that way. So
I had heard one person in Israel who should know in a podcast say that Israel doesn't have a gun safe culture like find in the United States. Was that a factor? I mean, in your home.
Okay, so I had a gun in my home years ago. I had to get a license, but I got the license while I was in the army. And I won't, it was for I don't know, a stupid reason, but I used to travel in places. I was in places where I had to have a gun. And if I checked out a gun from the army and God forbid I lost it, I'd go to jail. So I said, okay, I'm gonna spend $250 to get myself my own pistol. And worst case, I'll lose my pistol. I won't go to jail. You know, who else wants to go to jail? As an officer in the Air Force, I don't go to jail. So not that I plan to lose my gun, but I think it was a good investment, $250, etc., or whatever it was. I don't remember back then. That was a long time ago. But so you get trained. In order to get a license, you have to go to you have to go to training. You get a bunch of times on the range. I mean, I had obviously already been on ranges from the army with the army weapon, but I'd never fired a pistol until I got the pistol license. So I don't know whether you quote gun safety in the same way.
No, gun safe.
Gun safe. Oh, gun safe. Yeah. Oh, no. There are gun safes. I've seen them, but I don't think that to the same level. That is for sure. But remember again, most of the guns that people have had at home were from the army, and they were long guns. Gun safes don't help long guns. You can't put an M16 or etc. into a gun safe. I mean, you got a very big gun safe, but so it's a different story altogether. Nancy.
It took me a second to unmute. Thank you, Mark. Something that's not getting a lot of coverage yet, but that's coming up fast is the new World Zionist Organization election, which is an international election to fill power, who's in charge of some major organizations that in Israel that affect budgets and policy and so forth. And I read this week that a very prominent Haredi rabbi issued a statement directing his flock not to participate in the WZO election this year, which threw everything into disarray because the last election in 2020, a kind of a stealth organization of ultra Orthodox right-wing people popped up and they won a lot of the power, a lot of the votes that year because the non-Orthodox groups were all, as usual, fragmented. Any comments?
2 comments. I know the WZO since 1971 when I first worked for them. I was a high school student, and I worked with them, and then in 1972 I ran a small department of the WZO. So I go all the way back a long, long time with the WZO. And since the day I own it, I have one opinion of it. It needs to be closed. It serves no purpose. It is a money pit for not even second-rate politicians. Third-rate politicians who can't get anywhere in Israel end up being sent to the WZO to operate various departments and whatever. There is no excuse for its existence. Let's put it that way. So it's very hard for me to get too enthusiastic for the votes. I mean, in some levels we should be. We should be a little bit more sophisticated and try to figure out. But it's very hard because in the United States, the general Orthodox community is more organized and better organized than the non-Orthodox community. It's a general statement, but obviously it's a truism to some extent. The non-Orthodox community is larger, but it's not nearly as organized, and more importantly, they're not as engaged. So you have, a certain percentage of people who are non-Orthodox who are involved with UJA Federation and all the different organizations, but in absolute numbers, there aren't that many. And like you said, when even a group of modern Orthodox, forget the ultra Orthodox, the modern Orthodox, and all the modern Orthodox in Teaneck and the 5 towns all decide to vote for somebody or something, they're going to overwhelm the scattered voters in Westchester and God knows where who are voting for the more secular ticket. So another reason why it should be closed. There just is no excuse. There's nothing. Well, let me step back for 2 seconds. I do believe diaspora Jewry can do things in Israel. I used to believe that Israel doesn't need support from the diaspora Jewry because I thought we were a rich country and we don't need any support. We're a little less rich after this war, and I don't know where we're going to go in coming years. But I'm a strong, strong advocate, and I have been for many years, that anyone who wants to be involved in Israel Affairs should find an Israeli charity, whatever it might be, and get directly involved in that charity they have American friends of, give directly to that organization. If you, for the sake of argument, if you give $20,000 a year to UJA, you're a pisher who's not very valuable on the scale of UJA. But if you give $20,000 to a particular charity, you're a big donor. And you'll have an impact, and you can talk to them, and the CEO will take your calls, and you can do things. And I'm a strong believer that people should not be giving to the system, so to speak, the World Zionist Organization, the Jewish Agency, the UJA. Find your charities. Yeah, some of them have a 501c status in America, some of them don't, but okay, so you won't do as well in terms of taxes, but you'll give it to some place that really matters. And whether it's a rape crisis center or it's a place to dealing with injured soldiers or you name it, there are enough different charities in this country that are going to need help and need help. So if you care about Israel and want to give money and get involved, find the charity to get involved in, and you can make a big difference then. That's so not the WZO. Well, let it just die. Someone asked about the NGO law. Terrible law. All I can say, it's a terrible law. Once again, the right is trying to attack anything that opposes them in any which way. I'm gonna call it the right. I hate this thing, right, left, because I had an argument with a friend yesterday online. And she's a VC. Really, I like her a lot, but she talks about what's called Asmola Kitzoni, the extreme left. And I said to her, who is the extreme left? I don't know anyone on the extreme left at this point. And they're arguing with, well, people who think that the Palestinians want peace. Like I said, I don't even know anyone who I would define as left at this point. Maybe there were people before October 7th. I don't know of anyone right now who believe that. I believe there are people who think we should leave the door open for someday for peace. In the same way, the right. What does the right wing in Israel mean at this point? There are extreme right at this point. There are people who believe in it's more the religious versus the non-religious more than anything else. It's not right and left in the traditional sense. It's those who believe that we should have a halachic state, a state that the determination is by religious law, and those of us who want a secular country whose laws are based on secular principles, and that's really more of the divide. Okay, anybody else? Okay, well, I thank you all. We'll come back, I assume, in 2 weeks. I'm hoping to, no, I'm not even sure I'm hoping for that. I was going to say I was hoping to stop doing the Saturday updates because that was my plan when the war ends. And then we've decided we've had all these releases on Saturdays. So we'll see what happens. There's a chance they may succeed in extending the releases for another week. I don't know. Hopefully they will. But in any case. Okay, well, thank you all. If you're not a paid subscriber, please do. And something got to pay for Disney. So thank you all and have a wonderful couple of weeks and be in touch.
Thank you, Mark. Have a good trip to the United States.
Disneyland.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Hey, bye. Good night, everyone.